Welcome to Brainish English Stories.
For a week, there was so much goodness in the old March house that it could have been shared with the whole neighborhood. Everyone seemed unusually happy and full of goodwill. The girls were all trying to be kind and think of others, setting aside their own concerns to focus on being as selfless as possible. After their initial worry about their father subsided, the girls gradually stopped putting in so much effort and slowly returned to their old habits. They didn't forget their motto to live for others, but it seemed easier to be busy and cheerful rather than continue their earnest striving, especially after working so hard. They felt they deserved a break and allowed themselves many small indulgences. Jo caught a cold because she didn't cover her newly cut hair well enough. Aunt March didn't want anyone with a cold around her, so Jo was ordered to stay at home until she was better. Jo was more than happy to obey. After rummaging through the attic and basement to find things to keep her occupied, she settled on the sofa, ready to nurse her cold with books and medicine. Amy found that housework and her art didn't mix well, so she gave up the chores and returned to her artistic pursuits. Meg continued to visit her students every day and pretended to sew at home. In reality, she spent much of her time writing long letters to her mother or rereading the news from Washington. Beth, ever the diligent one, carried on with her tasks, though she, too, had moments of laziness and melancholy. Beth diligently completed her small tasks each day and often took on her sister's chores when they forgot. The house seemed like a clock that had lost its pendulum without the regular routine set by their mother. When Beth felt overwhelmed by missing her mother or worrying about her father, she would go to a certain closet, hide her face in the folds of an old dress she loved, and quietly cry and pray. No one knew what comforted her during those times, but everyone noticed how sweet and helpful she became afterward. She started to be the one her sisters went to for comfort or advice about their minor troubles. None of them realized that this time without their mother was a test of their character. When the initial excitement of managing the household on their own wore off, they felt like they had done well and deserved praise. They had done well, but their mistake was in stopping their efforts too soon. They learned this lesson through much worry and regret. 10 days after Mrs. March left, Beth approached her sisters with a request. "Meg, I wish you'd go and see the Hummels. You know Mother told us not to forget them." "I'm too tired to go this afternoon," replied Meg, rocking comfortably in her chair as she sewed. "Can't you go, Jo?" asked Beth. "It's too cold for me to go out with my cold," said Jo. "I thought your cold was almost better," said Beth. "It's good enough for me to go out with Lori, but not good enough to go to the Hummels," Jo admitted, laughing a bit but looking slightly embarrassed. "Why don't you go yourself?" asked Meg. "I have been going every day, but the baby is sick and I don't know what to do for it. Mrs. Hummel goes away to work and Lawton takes care of it, but the baby is getting sicker." "I think you or Hannah should go," Beth said earnestly. Meg promised she would go tomorrow. "Ask Hannah for something nice to take to them, Beth." "The fresh air will do you good," said Jo, adding, "I'd go, but I want to finish my writing. My head hurts and I'm tired, so I thought maybe one of you would go," said Beth, looking weary. "Amy will be here soon, and she can go for us," suggested Meg. Beth lay down on the sofa, and the others returned to their tasks, soon forgetting about the Hummels. An hour passed. Amy didn't come. Meg went to her room to try on a new dress. Jo was engrossed in her writing, and Hannah was napping in front of the kitchen fire. Beth quietly put on her hood, filled her basket with small comforts for the poor children, and went out into the cold air with a heavy heart and a sad look in her patient eyes. It was late when she returned, and no one noticed her going upstairs and shutting herself in her mother's room. Half an hour later, Jo went to her mother's closet for something and found little Beth sitting on the medicine chest, looking very serious, with red eyes and a bottle of medicine in her hand. "What's the matter?" cried Jo as Beth put out her hand to warn her away and asked quickly, "You've had scarlet fever, haven't you?" "Yes, a long time ago when Meg had it." "Why?" "Then I'll tell you." "Oh, Jo, the baby's dead." "What baby?" asked Jo, startled. "Mrs. Hummels' baby. It died in my lap before she got home," cried Beth with a sob. "My poor dear, how terrible for you." "I should have gone," said Jo, taking her sister in her arms as she sat down in her mother's big chair, looking very sorry. "It wasn't terrible, Jo, just very sad. I saw right away it was sicker, but Lochen said her mother had gone for a doctor, so I took the baby and let Lottie rest. It seemed like it was sleeping, but all of a sudden it gave a little cry and shook, and then it was very still. I tried to warm its feet, and Lottie gave it some milk, but it didn't move, and I knew it was dead." "Don't cry, dear." "What did you do?" "I just sat and held it gently until Mrs. Hummel came with the doctor. He said it was dead and looked at Heinrich and Minna, who have sore throats. Scarlet fever, ma'am." "You should have called me before," he said angrily. Mrs. Hummel told him she was poor and had tried to help the baby herself, but now it was too late, and she could only ask him to help the others and hope someone would pay him. He smiled then and was kinder, but it was very sad, and I cried with them until he suddenly turned around and told me to go home and take medicine right away, or I'd get the fever. "No, you won't," cried Jo, hugging her close with a scared look. "Oh, Beth, if you get sick, I'll never forgive myself. What should we do?" "Don't be scared. I think I won't be too sick. I looked in Mother's book and saw that it starts with a headache, sore throat, and strange feelings like mine. So I did take some medicine, and I feel better," said Beth, putting her cold hands on her hot forehead and trying to look well. "If Mother was only at home," said Jo, grabbing the book, feeling like Washington was very far away. She read a page, looked at Beth, felt her head, checked her throat, and then said seriously, "You've been around the baby every day for more than a week, and with the others who are going to get sick, so I'm afraid you are going to get it. Beth, I'll call Hannah. She knows all about being sick. Don't let Amy come. She never had it, and I would hate to give it to her." "Can't you and Meg have it again?" asked Beth, worried. "I guess not. I don't care if I do. It would serve me right for being selfish and letting you go while I stayed here writing silly stuff," muttered Jo as she went to ask Hannah. Hannah woke up quickly and took charge right away, saying there was no need to worry. Everyone had scarlet fever, and if treated correctly, nobody died. Joe believed her and felt much better as they went up to call Meg. "Now I'll tell you what we'll do," said Hannah after she had checked Beth and asked her questions. "We will have Dr. Bangs just take a look at you, dear, and make sure we start the right way. Then we'll send Amy to Aunt March's for a while to keep her safe, and one of you girls can stay at home and keep Beth company for a day or two." "I'll stay, of course. I'm the oldest," began Meg, looking worried and feeling guilty. "I will stay because it's my fault she is sick. I told Mother I'd do the errands, and I didn't," said Joe firmly. "Which one will you have, Beth?" "We only need one," said Hannah. "Joe, please." And Beth leaned her head against her sister with a content look, which settled the matter. "I'll go and tell Amy," said Meg, feeling a little hurt, but also a bit relieved, because she didn't like taking care of sick people, and Joe did. Amy was very upset and angrily said she would rather get the fever than go to Aunt March's. Meg tried to reason with her, pleaded, and even commanded, but it was no use. Amy said she would not go, and Meg left her in despair to ask Hannah what they should do. Before Meg came back, Lori walked into the living room and found Amy crying with her head in the sofa cushions. She told him what happened, hoping he would comfort her, but Lori just put his hands in his pockets and walked around the room, whistling softly as he thought deeply. After a while, he sat down next to her and said in his nicest voice, "Now, be a sensible girl."